Hi there. It's the week after the election, and I wanted to talk about one of the big themes to emerge from the election, which is that Keir Starmer's Labour Party managed to secure a massive majority with only 33.7% of the vote. It produced 66.2% of the seats. So we got this massively disproportionate result, which was a result of the first past the post system. So to understand how this comes about, it's important to understand a little bit about the system. So the way that it works is that the UK and Northern Ireland is divided up into 650 seats or constituencies, each of roughly equal size, and the boundaries of that are drawn by the Electoral Commission, which is an independent body. Now, from the voter's point of view, it's really straightforward. The voter goes into the voting booth, they get a ballot slip, and the slip has got all of the prospective parliamentary candidates listed on it, and what the voter does is put an X in a box. And when that's counted, whoever gets the most votes, not necessarily a majority, will win the seat. And so the result of that is that if you've got lots of candidates and they all get a fair number of votes, is that you can end up being a member of parliament with a very low percentage of the vote. Maybe even something like 25% of the vote, that might be the most votes, you would be elected, which immediately points to some of the problems with the first past the post system. So how have people defended this system? Well, the biggest defence that you get of this system is that it tends to produce strong and stable government. So what do we mean by that? Well, strong government because the winning party gets a massive majority in the House of Commons, and that means that the government is going to be strong. In other words, they're going to be able to get their legislative agenda through Parliament. They're going to be an effective government because they have that majority. They're going to be able to do what they want with it. They're going to be able to get stuff done. And stable because if you have a secure majority in the House of Commons, the government is going to be able to last a full 5 years, and therefore they're going to be able to deliver on the mandate produced by the election result. In other words, they're going to be able to get through the policies contained in their manifesto. So that's the big argument in its favour, and I guess it's worth pointing out that it doesn't always produce that. We've lived through in the UK several periods where first past the post did not produce a strong majority for the winning party. From 2010 to 2015 we had a coalition government, and that was pretty strong and stable in and of itself. But then we had that period after Theresa May was elected Prime Minister from 2017 to 2019, after she called that early election, having become leader in 2016. It produced a hung parliament, and that led to an incredibly unstable period. So the idea that first past the post always produces strong and stable government is a bit of a misnomer. It certainly hasn't in recent times, although it did so much more effectively in the past and seems to be delivering strong majorities for the winning party now. The other big advantage of first past the post that's often put forward is that it keeps out extremist parties. The nature of the system is that if you're a party, say like Reform or the Green Party, and your vote is spread out across the country, you can do really, really well in lots of seats, perhaps winning 12% of the vote in lots and lots of seats. But unless you have concentrated support in a specific seats, you could win all of those votes and not win a single member of parliament. And that is, in fact, what happened in many seats. So the Green Party of England and Wales, they won 6.4% of the vote, and they only won 4 seats, or 0.6% of the total number available. And similarly for Reform at this election, they won 4.2 million votes, which was 14.3% of the vote, and they only won 5 seats, or 0.8% of the total. So it's really difficult for those small parties to win, because in order to win you need to have that concentrated support, and that means for those smaller parties it changes their electoral strategy. So the Green Party, for example, did really well in this election compared to previous elections. In previous elections, the most seats they've won is 1 MP in Brighton Pavilion. What they've had to do is develop an electoral strategy where they focus their campaigning efforts on the seats that they think they're most likely to win, so that they don't fall into the trap of having their votes spread out across the country. Now, the downside of that, of course, is if you're a Green voter in a seat, even next door to Brighton Pavilion, which is where I am, your vote's not going to go towards electing an MP. So there are going to be electoral deserts under this system where the party that you want to support is not going to stand much of a choice, and that makes much of a chance rather, and that makes an argument for tactical voting. And I guess the final thing that you could say in defence of this system is that it maintains the link between the MP and their constituents. So you've got that direct relationship between an area and a group of voters and their Member of Parliament, which means that if you want to go to a Member of Parliament for a specific problem in your area, you can do that. Now, I guess, again, the downside of that is that it can create quite a lot of NIMBYism built into the system. If a Member of Parliament is very, very specific to a local area and they've got a concern, say, about something being built in the area that they don't want to be built, then this system can produce a tendency towards NIMBYism, and that could be seen as a disadvantage of that constituency link. Okay, so what about the disadvantages? And the disadvantages are many. We've already talked about some of them. I guess the big one is the system is just manifestly unfair and undemocratic. It cannot be the case that, in reality, in moral terms, I suppose, that the Labour Party at this election have got a mandate to govern. And actually, I'm not just talking about this election, I'm talking about any election. The winning party at the general election in Britain has not won a majority of the vote for almost 100 years. You have to go back to 1935 for the last time it happened. The Conservative Party in that election won 55% of the vote. Aside from that, in the last 100 years, it just hasn't happened. And that's got to be seen as a real disadvantage of the system. It's also the case that the party who get the most votes don't necessarily win the election. So if we go back to the 1951 election, the Labour Party, led by Clement Attlee, got the most votes in that election, but the winner of the election in terms of who got the most seats in Parliament was the Conservative Party, led by Winston Churchill, and actually after that election, it led to 13 years out of power for the Labour Party. They next came to power when Harold Wilson won the election in 1964. It also has the effect of narrowing voter choice. So essentially what the electoral system does is it produces a two-party system where you have these big parties, in the case of the UK, Labour Party and the Conservative Party, who form these big broad tent political parties, and in order to win elections under first past the post, it makes sense to move to what's called the centre ground of politics. And the idea behind that is that most voters will tend to be around the centre ground, and so as a viable electoral strategy, this is called median voter theory, it makes sense for the parties to move towards the centre. So I guess some people would say that's a good thing, because you're going to get political parties who are going to be moving into the centre ground, and that's going to moderate politics. The obvious disadvantage is that that's going to militate against alternative parties coming into government or having any say, like the Green Party, for example. And it's also going to mean that political disagreement within the system is going to tend to be within parties rather than between parties. So you're going to have a lot of political disagreement within the Labour Party or within the Conservative Party. Say, for example, the Socialist Campaign Group on the left of the Labour Party, and then the Starmerites on the right. There's going to be lots of disagreement within parties, but not a lot between them. And what that does is it means that a lot of the debate that's happening within the democracy is not out there in the public domain, it's within political parties. And so it tends to produce quite a closed-off, narrow politics, where the substance of politics takes place within parties and not out within the public. Now, I think that's a really bad thing. And so I think that's one of the key reasons why first past the post should go, frankly. And I guess the final critique is how it feels to be a voter. If you're lucky enough within first past the post to live in a marginal seat, let's say it's a seat held by the Conservatives that Labour might have a chance of winning, but let's say you're a natural Green voter, as I am, that puts you in a really invidious position. Do you vote according to your heart and according to your conscience and vote for the Green Party, or do you vote tactically in order to try and get rid of the Conservative Party? Now, that is in fact what a lot of people did at the last election, but it represents an undermining of democracy, really, because what it forces voters to do is, rather than expressing their true preference, they're forced to vote tactically within this system. And if you don't happen to live within a marginal constituency, well, you might as well not bother going out to vote. If you live in a really safe Labour seat, for example, it can leave you feeling like your vote doesn't really make that much difference. And there are very many people within First Past the Post whose votes are wasted, either because they live in a very safe seats and their vote therefore doesn't make much of a difference anyway, or because their vote doesn't go towards electing a Member of Parliament. So loads of votes are wasted within this system. So the question then is, why don't we change it? And there are lots of obvious alternatives to First Past the Post that would produce parliaments that are much more representative of how people actually voted, and would have the effect of creating a political system where lots of smaller parties emerged covering the full scope of ideological positions within politics, and liberating the public debate that I mentioned was within parties where you could actually have it out in the public. Now, obviously, I think that would be a lot better, but the problem is that the system reinforces itself. You've just seen Keir Starmer become Prime Minister, leading the Labour Party to an overwhelming landslide victory, and of course that's exactly the same thing as happened in 1997 when Tony Blair became Prime Minister. And so the parties that benefit from the system are never going to be incentivised to change it. Even when Harold Wilson in 1974 didn't quite win a majority and ended up governing as a minority government, it was still the case that the Labour Party didn't choose, in that circumstance, to work with the Liberal Party at the time to bring about proportional representation. So I don't think this is ever going to change in the UK, absent a mass movement like the Chartist movement, if you go back to the early 19th century, to make it change. So that's a note of pessimism to end with. I hope you've enjoyed this video and it wasn't too rambly for you. If you did, like and subscribe to the channel, and maybe check out some of my other videos. For now, goodbye and best wishes.